streaming is on.
Hello there.
Hello.
Hi.
It's working.
Hey, John. Just about.
Yes. Well, we will just gather the rest of the people in the room.
Sure.
Yeah. 2 seconds.
Hi.
2 seconds. Hi, nice to see you. Long time.
Yes.
How you been?
Good. Good.
Yeah. All locked in our quarantine, or are you free and about?
Just about at the moment. It's cut. The lockdown is coming again.
The lockdown is coming. Yeah, it's the same here. Well, I think we're about to be there. Har vi lukket døren? Hva ligger der imellom? Hæ? Men det går fint, bare sitt her. Det går helt fint. Ja, du gjør som du vil. Okay. Well, since we are live streaming, I will now have like an informal welcome to the Antiwar Festival at USF in Bergen. My name is STWC, coming from the Anti-War Initiative. So we are in Bergen on the west coast of Norway, a quite geopolitical location, you might say. And this festival is the first of its kind here in Norway. And we organize it together with the International Women's League of Peace and Freedom, which is a more than 100 years old organization, but we are quite young, coming to 2 years, I think. So that is why we have invited you to come, because you come from an organization with a long history, developed back in 2001, just after the 11th of September attack in the United States. This is the last 3 days of the festival. We have art all around us, and we have had a packed program that you are to see at our YouTube channel eventually. We will collect everything there. So, of course, we had hoped to have you in the room with us, but we are all in this situation, so it's not new. But I think it's important to... How's the sound for you? Is it some feedback here?
It's fine. It's fine. It comes and goes slightly, but it's fine.
Yeah, okay. I think this of sharing knowledge across different organizations and also across countries is of importance, because we do need to collaborate, because we have a lot of things to do. And we just had on Tuesday David Adler visiting from Progressive International, and he was talking about that as well, also about the coming event this weekend in Iceland. So I'm very happy to have you, John Riis, among us. We will not talk for 3 hours as we wanted to, because this is a quite tiring format for everybody. So we will try and keep it for approximately 1 hour. And I have prepared some questions, but of course, mostly the aim is here to listen and take notes for our organization. But I also have a chair next to me, so if any of you in the public would like also to ask or comment something directly, you are more than welcome. So I put it here. So we have announced it as a workshop, but let's see how it goes. I mean, this is a new format for us. But do you want to introduce yourself more and maybe your organization? for the public?
Yes, so I can certainly do that. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak here. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations on organising the festival. I hope that it's gone well and that your final 3 days do go well. In addition to that, let me just give you a little bit of background then about the Stop the War Coalition in Britain. As Gita said, it was formed in the week following the 9/11 attack. In fact, the reason why it's called the Stop the War Coalition is because when we wrote the first leaflet, it had the title Stop the War Before It Starts. In other words, because some of us had looked at what the Project for the New American Century was planning, at what the Bush administration was likely to do in response to the 9/11 attack. We pretty clearly foresaw both the attack on Afghanistan and the attack on Iraq, and we weren't alone in that. I think, as it turned out, many thousands of people in this country and many millions of people eventually around the globe saw that terrible possibility looming even before it took place. So the week after 9/11, we held a meeting in London. It was the biggest public meeting in one of the biggest halls in London for many years. The main hall was full, the upstairs hall was full, another overflow hall was full, and there were still 500 people outside, and all the speakers, I was one of them, Jeremy Corbyn was another, Tariq Ali, the veteran of the anti-Vietnam War movement, was another. We had to go around and make the speech 4 or 5 times that night to different audiences in different parts of the room. So it was certainly a risk. I mean, we didn't know when we issued that first leaflet whether or not we'd get a good response, a bad response, or something in between. But the fact that there was such a huge public response made it clear to us that we had the responsibility to try and build the largest possible movement against the Afghan and Iraq wars. We did it on some very simple, actually very well tried in the history of the movement principles. We made it clear that if you were opposed to the war for whatever reason, you were welcome to participate in the organization. So you might be against the war on the kind of anti-imperialist principles that I and other people from the left held, but you might be a Quaker pacifist. You might be a Muslim activist who also for religious reasons was against the war. You might just think that this war was a terrible policy mistake rather than an expression of something deeper seated in the system. You might just be appalled by the waste of money. And you could be in any organization or none. You could be in a trade union or not. It didn't matter. You were welcome in the organization. All you had to agree was that you wanted to stop the war and you wanted to be united with other people in action to do something about it. And that's always a very clarifying moment because it allows the maximum unity in action and the minimum of internal debate. It's not that people didn't have different views about Saddam Hussein or American imperialism or the history of the 20th century, but those were debates that took place outside Stop the War, and people were very welcome to conduct those discussions with their friends inside Stop the War, but it wasn't the policy of Stop the War to adopt one attitude or another. We weren't going to adopt a Marxist worldview, a Quaker worldview, a Muslim worldview, a pacifist worldview. We were simply going to agree that we needed to campaign against the war. So that's one of the things, I think, that made sure that the movement grew to such enormous scale. The demonstration against the Iraq war in February 2002 is in the record books in this country as the biggest political demonstration that's ever been had in these islands. And there was a direct line, in my view, a direct line of causality between the simplicity of the principle and the scale of the response, and also to the, now you have to say, to the longevity of the organisation. If we'd institutionalised more argument within the organisation, I don't think it would have lasted.
Live streaming is on.
Okay,
And
then.
here?
Good to know.
It's
Sorry?
like this GPS voice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, actually, that punctuated what I was saying at just the right point, because I think that's about the kind of as much as it's sensible to say about the founding of Stop the War as an introduction.
Yeah, it's so many gates in here, but I think the big question is, how did you manage to make it last for so long? I mean, because you must be a lot of different opinions, but then you had some rules then that's like you don't discuss politics of that sort here. Our main goal together is this. I guess the framework must be kind of communicated clearly.
Yes, we were very clear from that at the outset. I mean, the meeting that I described, the first meeting, was a huge meeting. I mean, that must have had in total 4,000 or 5,000 people at it. The following week, we had an organising meeting just to set up the organisation that had 500 people at it, and there was quite a long, as there often is in those kind of meetings, quite a long toing and froing. But we were absolutely clear that we weren't setting this up just as a kind of left anti-imperialist thing, that we wanted a broader appeal than that we wanted a very simple point of access for people. Didn't, of course, mean that people couldn't discuss their kind of more specific analyses, but that wasn't something that we were going to adopt this or that analysis as the core of Stop the War. The point of Stop the War was to bring together people with different analyses, but the same conclusion. And we did establish that pretty kind of forcefully at the beginning. And that meant that people from the Labour Party, people from the revolutionary left, people from the Muslim community, Christian pacifists, the trade unions, all bought into the organisation at an early stage, and have remained committed to it over a long period. So it's proved, its simplicity proved to be critical for its durability, for its long lastingness.
But how many members do you have at this point?
Well, I think with social movements, membership is always a little bit difficult to calibrate, unlike political parties. So it depends how you do that. I think we've got something like 20,000 people on the mailing list. I think the Twitter following is something like 30,000. Somebody can check for me if I've misremembered that. The people who are paying money on a regular basis to the organisation is much smaller, some thousands, 2,000-3,000 people. So it depends. It depends how you exactly do that. But it's and also I should say, and this is even more important than any of those things really. Protest movements are movements of opposition, so it depends what your opponents are doing. So the level of support that you get during an immediate crisis, like Afghanistan and Iraq, or even like Libya or Syria, is different than you will do in a period where the imperialists aren't engaged in any active war.
Yes, the former speakers we had, David Adler, and also the journalist from Norway, Elisabeth Holt, was talking about this period before a war breaks out, where the tension is rising, and that's kind of the fundamental your organization was. I mean, you could see what was coming rising due to the tension, and the peace movement in Norway was quite high before the invasion of Iraq back in 2003, and it's said to be the reason why the Norwegian government did not partake as a war partner. We were there, but it was called something else at least. But then today it's not so. I mean, the air of the balloon has kind of escaped. And we also discussed that the other day with this Scandinavian culture, where the South it's very political active, but up here we are sedate in a way, and so it's difficult for us to mobilize, and that's one of the reasons you are here. But what the tension is high now. I mean, with the president in the United States and the right-wing leaders here in Europe, with the pandemic, we see also that people will use this. The economical tension is, power is shifting, so it's like very scary ground. So, but still, we have our blind spots. The newspapers could be filled with a lot of other stories, but they're not. So our attention is not there. So my question to you is, like, your personal view on where you find the most productive field of the people movement to look at the moment.
Well, I think probably there are three areas where we do most work at the moment. So one is around the conflict in the Yemen, and because of the very close ties between the British state and the Saudi Arabian state, there is a presence of that question in British politics. There's a active Yemeni community which is obviously very engaged on this issue, and although the protests aren't on the scale that obviously they were even over Libya and Syria, never mind about over Iraq and Afghanistan, and obviously COVID has made a real difference to the willingness of people to protest at the moment. But all that notwithstanding, there have been some serious protests over that. And we're also engaged, obviously, in quite a lot of educational work, online public meetings and rallies and so forth around that issue. Of course, the lockdown doesn't stop you lobbying MPs, it doesn't stop you petitioning, it doesn't stop you doing any of that kind of work. So around the war in Yemen, we're doing a certain amount of work. We're also doing quite a lot of public meetings, film showings, written material on the website around the tension with China, which of course is the global emerging conflict, the new Cold War, the most dangerous international conflict. And so analysing that, writing about it, having meetings about it, educating people about it, that's vital work. It's kind of where we were with the Project for the New American Century back before the attack on the Twin Towers, in the run-up to the Afghan and Iraq wars. And that's crucial work because it determines the size of the core of people who will be sufficiently clear in their analysis and in touch organizationally that can act as a springboard for a wider movement should those conflicts become hot conflicts, probably in the first instance proxy conflicts in other parts of the world rather than direct US-China conflict. So that's a second area of work. And I think it'd be wrong for me not to say that the Palestinian question has always been an absolutely central one for Stop the War. Now,
yeah, the line now is a little bit weak. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So Palestine has always been a critical question for us. There are other organizations, Palestine Solidarity organizations, which take the lead on this, but Stop the War has always been central since it was formed to mobilizations around the Palestinian issue, because we have argued that, to understand this issue is to understand something which is fundamental to conflict in the Middle East. And so that also remains an important part of what we do.
But we're kind of all trapped in our own echo chambers, and it's difficult to take to have to make sure that you take the right stand in cases when we are living in the middle of it, and we all are victim of our media's propaganda. So how do you, I mean, through the years, you must have kind of build up some methods to try and not take the wrong stand, or how do you deal with this like presence and yeah, I mean, what the world now is, of course, radical strategies, but also a middle ground. I mean, we have to be able to listen to things, and yeah, I mean, you see what I'm getting at? Like,
yeah, yes, I think that's a combination of two things. One thing is that we've always been lucky in Stop the War, in that the core.
Can you repeat that?
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, can you just repeat that sentence because it was blocked?
Yeah, we've always been lucky in Stop the War that the core sort of leadership of the coalition has contained a number of people who have quite detailed knowledge of and quite a degree of analytical capacity about modern imperialism. So, I mean, I've written on this subject, but so was Andrew Murray, who was our chair for many years, leading trade unionist, was at the time that he was involved, a member of the Communist Party, but he'd written about the Project on the New American Century, had written about the Bush administration. Tariq Ali, of course, has a long history of this. And there's quite a number of people in Stop the War who have that kind of history. Mm-hmm. And they also have a kind of non-sectarian response. You know, they're not insistent on every last dot and comma of their particular take becoming Stop the War policy. They're happy to identify broad areas of agreement, even at a level of analysis. Mm. And that's stood us in very, very good stead. You know, Jeremy Corbyn, who was our chair for many years, has also a career-long interest in anti-imperialist causes. So it's an informed, diverse, and non-sectarian group of people, but it does have theoretical depth, and that's quite unusual. Usually, theoretical depth means theoretical disagreement, but that hasn't always. You know, I'm not saying there haven't been disagreements, but people have been willing to sort of carve out a kind of broad level of quite deep agreement, which they then use to try and educate and discuss with a wider membership. And at the same time, not insist even that broadly agreed thing is what everybody thinks. Clearly, you know, there are some points of agreement with pacifists about this and some points of disagreement. And so, you know, we've had an ability to analyze complex situations, but at the same time to operate a broad movement. And a lot of that comes through trial and error. Comes through, you know, there isn't a rule book in advance for combining those things. It's like riding a bike. In the end of the day, you only learn by getting in the saddle, doing it, and occasionally falling off.
But did you all know each other from before? It seems like the core of the organization is a quite academic group that has analytical ability, and that you are able to cooperate even though you can disagree.
Some people didn't. Lindsay German, who's the convener of Stop the War, and I didn't really know Andrew Murray until that first meeting. He walked off the floor of that first meeting. He said, "I'm the press officer for the train drivers union," which is what his job was at the time. "I'd like to help." Some other people, Andrew Bergin, who played a big role, I'd never worked with before. I barely knew. I wouldn't have recognised him. He just turned up. Tariq Ali, I did know and had worked with over a long period of time. I have one question
before I open. Maybe you have also some questions. Because for a young, at least for the anti-war, we need some tools, and I was wondering if you have some for us. Do you have some advice for a young organization with ambition
Yes.
located in this place?
First of all, focus on what you do, not what you think. If you aren't involved in action, then the discussion is sterile. What does it matter whether you agree, disagree, because you aren't agreeing or disagreeing to do anything? So it becomes the academic seminar, and who cares? There's plenty of those around. Go to a university. Discussion and debate is important, but it's only important in order to reach a conclusion about what you should do. So keep the organization action-oriented. You know, it's about doing stuff. It's about petitioning, demonstrating, holding rallies, holding meetings. It's about trying to make an impact in the wider world, and that's very important. Don't be afraid of. I think you were saying we're in our own echo chambers, and people often have a phrase in this country which says, "You're preaching to the converted." I never worry about preaching to the converted. The church has been doing that for thousands of years, very successfully, and that's because it realizes that when you preach to the converted then go and preach to the unconverted. That's how a congregation works. So there's nothing wrong with that. It only becomes wrong if you don't do anything with it. If it's just preaching, if nobody goes out of the door and does something. So always keep in mind, simplicity is an art. Simplicity in terms of expressing yourself, simplicity in terms of the aims of the organization, simplicity and clarity in terms of the actions that you take. You know, complexity is easy. Every academic can talk complexly, but it was Einstein who said, if you can't explain a complex question to somebody who doesn't understand it, then you don't understand it yourself. And that's always been our kind of guiding method. Very good to discuss and debate and analyze, but in the end of the day, you have to express yourself simply and take action. And if you're focused on those two things, you minimize the areas of disagreement, maximize the possibility of success, and that's what keeps any organization going.
Yeah, that was great. That's great. Thank you for that. I think we have a question also from the audience, so we'll take a seat here. Var du først? Ja, men jeg har ikke kontroll på det.
Yes. I'll introduce myself. How is this? You're going to introduce?
Yeah, I can do it.
Please do that.
Okay. John Lavik, he is also a part of, actually the initiator of the anti-war initiative.
Yes, Mr. Rees. Yes. You told me you had 2,000 people paying for a membership. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That inform you. It's not a very big thing, but then you're comparing the population in Norway and in the UK. You are 10 times bigger than us, but we are quite fresh. You really got to be at it because we're going to pick up with you if you don't watch it. So there are several things I'm interested, because one of the things we were very concerned about when we started this anti-war initiative was we don't want to make another left-wing protest organization. We don't want so that our opponents, to put it mildly, could just ask just another left-wing group. We have enough of that. Don't worry about that. We are very concerned about making a political platform, our entire profile, on a very broad basis. So it's not easy today, even in Norway, with the situation here, to say, this is just another left-wing organization. We have a platform which is very, very broad-minded, and, for instance, we do not have explicitly that we're against NATO. What we are against is a NATO activity out of area, and Norway taking part in that. So I'm interested there. From what you said, there was a train the conductor, was it from that one from RMT who came on the meeting with you?
It was actually from the Train Drivers Union, which is ASLEF, but he was an official in the Rail Workers Union. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. I know who that is. Well, I know the organisation a little bit. But anyhow, could you comment on that? The problem of being get this stamp.
Yeah.
Your left-wing organisation, and of course, if they can put you in that category, it's very easy to get anywhere. That's our experience, and it's all right to talk to the converted, but if the converted are few or limited, then I'm not sure if I'm happy with that. So could you say something about this? You understand, of course, the problem I'm raising. Mm.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, to be honest, there was never much doubt that Stop the War had a left-wing leadership. It did. It came from the left of the Labour Party, from the revolutionary left, from the trade union left. So there really wasn't too much question about that. But the simplicity of the slogan meant that it was a very inclusive organisation. So it drew in sections of the population which, frankly, had very little political profile. I mean, the Muslim community was massively engaged with the Stop the War coalition. So where we got the breadth was less by saying, okay, how can we involve people who are known figures on the political right? That happened a little, but not very much. I mean, partly because it was a Labour government. We were fighting against the Blair government. So the right of the Labour Party was 100% behind the Blair government, and so that put you in a certain place in the political spectrum. Where the breadth came from was the popular appeal. So all sorts of people, of course, who'd never ever been remotely near a left-wing organisation, had never been on a demonstration in their lives, never given money to a left-wing cause, were engaged with Stop the War. So the breadth was in the base of it, and only partly in the political figures that we engaged. Now, of course, by the time it became as big as it did by the February 15th demonstration, of course, it was so big that its gravitational pull was so great that, you know, you've got Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins flying over the Atlantic to come and speak in Hyde Park. You've got Jesse Jackson speaking in Hyde Park. So I'd say the key to breadth is the depth of mobilisation in the population and the gravitational pull that creates. If you try to stitch together too broad a coalition at the top, well, you can stretch that elastic so far, but at a certain point, the more it stretches to the right, the more you lose off the left. And seeing anti-war activity is always going to be a left-wing thing, you begin to lose part of your base. Now, where you draw the line on a particular issue, exactly how you do that, but, you know, I can't advise you from this distance.
That's honest.
Just one more question.
Okay.
Important thing for us is not only to be concerned about the anti-war activity, the anti-war politics. We have a lot of focus on peace, so as the alternative. So, and that means that for instance, in our platform, we don't say anything about capitalism. We don't even use the word imperialism. We are very sort of concerned. That's what we try to people to support us on. It's time now to stop this kind of war, violence and as the way of solving our conflicts, our problems. We have to find another way to solve our problems, our conflicts between parts of the world, between countries, between this and that. So we have a lot of focus on peace is not only necessary before things really goes down the drain. It's also what we think. It's also a possibility. So we have to talk about that. How do we do that? What's it going to look like? What the specific alternatives to war and conflict, aggression, and so on.
Yeah, the great virtue of being against something is that it specifies the problem and it broadens the base. Because for instance, to take an example from another part of political life, if I say I'm against the privatization of the National Health Service, everybody knows what I mean. If I say I'd like a socialistic medicine provision, we'll all argue about what that is. If you say you want a world without peace, there's going to be 15 different analyses of how you get there. If you say I want to stop this war, then it's very clear what you want. So, people often say this, shouldn't you put things positively? Well, yeah, up to a point, but people tend to protest against the thing that's happening to them because, that's what unequal balance of power means. There's a group of people in power and it's not us, and they're doing things and we don't like it, and that's why it's a protest movement. So, you can't override that verbally. You can't pretend that we're in power and pretend that we have the capacity to provide a different society when in fact we're actually protesting against what they're doing in this one. And I find that defining narrowly what you're against broadens the breadth of the campaign. Requiring people to sign up to what you'd like in the future, that's a debate. Straight off the bat there, you're going to get a debate. So I think, different language, different places. I'm not saying that what worked for us will necessarily work for you. Obviously, you have to be the judges of that. I often find, a lot lost in translation in these discussions. But that's kind of, I think most people in Stop the War would give you that answer on that issue.
All right. Just a short comment on that, if I may. I don't know, maybe I would disagree with you or maybe not. Because when you say, if you talk about peace, you get 15 different ideas or thoughts or reflections about that, maybe 50 different. And I'm not sure if I would start looking at that as a problem. I would say that is a situation where a lot of different ideas on how we're going to get to a better future can come together and talk. So I'm not worried about that. 15 different views on how to get peace in the world. It's a good thing. Let's start from there.
It's a good thing for a debating society. It's not a good thing for an action-oriented movement. To be honest, there are 1,000 places in society where you can go for a good argument. The bar, you get a good argument in the bar. Academic seminars, they'll talk themselves to death arguing different points of view. But it's different if you want united action to come out of it. If you want us all to turn up on the same street corner on the same day with a single slogan, then better to narrow the parameters for disagreement and maximize the possibility of agreement by not asking people to debate everything, but saying, okay, what's our priority? What do we need to do now? So we have lots of debates. That's I wouldn't want to stop debate, and we have a lot of discussion in Stop the War all the time, and people are very welcome to come along and put whatever position they like. But when it comes to what we do and what our main slogan is, we tend to kind of try and narrow the area of debate to maximize the mobilization. And I think there is a relationship between those two things.
I think it's very interesting.
I mean, you may find a different model. I'm not saying this is this model may not be for export, but
I think when we talk about debates I'm not an academic. I'm from the trade union movement in Norway, and of course we like debates also there. But we are quite focused on solutions, on practice.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what. Take for instance Norway's relationship to Russia. It's a very, very important question. We are not debates, yes, but we want to get down to something specific, which we as a peace movement, as a movement who wants Norway's relations to Russia we are neighbors and they are not our enemies. We want to be friends. So how do we do that specifically? And let's go to the Libya thing. Why didn't the West let the African Union land their plane in Tripoli and try to make a discussion and solution? Why not? So I think when we talk about peace, it's not a debate. We want the practical. Is it possible? If it is possible, yes. Okay, how do we do it?
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Kan du ta stol med deg, så er det plass til Ivar? Well, we have another person with a question. This is Ivar.
Hello there.
Hello, how are you doing?
Not too bad.
Well, yeah, I'm also a member of the anti-war initiative, amongst other organizations, but among them Latin America group and so on, Solidarity group. I've been actually following the Stop the War coalition for years, and been interesting, but I have some two questions for you, and it's one from earlier times in the Stop the War coalition history, and it's one at the present. What for the role of the Stop the War coalition? Understand me right. I will start with you said something about the activism and the protests, which also have been in Norway when the Afghanistan and the Iraqi wars was initiated, and the protests, and it was huge protests in London, I remember, and one of the biggest protests in Norway, the two biggest cities, Oslo and Bergen as well. But after that, it got down a bit with the participation and the protest, but that's another story. But I want to know, I've read, I'm not sure it's correct, but the Stop the War coalition role in the Libyan war, the start of the war and the end of it. And how, my question is, how was the Stop the War coalitions working with that war, and what was the stand towards Gaddafi? I'll be straight. I have read something that was a little bit worrying for me, but if it's correct or not, it was that it was some skirmishes inside the Stop the War coalition at that time. A small Marxist-Leninist party of Britain was excluded in a debate of the opinion of who to participate with in the Libyan war. I just want to know if that happened, or why that happened, and how you think in the time after, what the role of you and the coalition was towards the Gaddafi regime and so on, and the NATO bombings, which Norway was one of the best bombers, by the way. Not a good problem.
Congratulations.
Tragic, yes, congratulations. Thanks so very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And the other.
Sorry.
Okay, you can ask. I can ask it afterwards.
Yeah, let's do them one at a time.
Yes.
So Libya, we were opposed to the Libyan bombing. We mobilised as best we could over that. Our attitude towards the Gaddafi regime is the same attitude, actually, that we had to the Saddam regime or to the Taliban in Afghanistan, or indeed to the Assad regime in Syria, and that is this, that we don't take a position about those regimes. Whether or not those regimes stand or fall or are replaced or not is a question for the Libyan people or for the Iraqi people or for the Afghans. It's not for the British anti-war movement to say to them, we think you should have this government, or we think you should have that government. That's a kind of colonial mindset that we don't approve of in our rulers, and we don't hold ourselves. Now, of course, different groups within the Stop the War coalition, in their meetings or their papers or their publications, will have different views. Some of them were pro-Gaddafi, some of them weren't, and that's absolutely their right to carry on their discussions and propaganda about their political position in the left in general. But what Stop the War isn't going to do is to adopt one or other of those positions. It's enough, and this is the practical version of how I described Stop the War being founded. The sole criteria of the Stop the War coalition is to stop our government interfering in the politics of other countries, specifically to stop it interfering militarily. That's our job. No Afghan can do that. No Iraqi or Libyan can do that. That's the business of British citizens, to stop their government interfering in a neo-colonial way, militarily, in the life of other nations. And that's what the movement's for. And you can be part of that movement if you've got one view of Libyan society, or a different view of Libyan society, or this view of Libyan political forces, or that view of the Libyan government. You're all welcome to come and participate if you think that the British government shouldn't intervene militarily in those countries. So that's the position that we took. And anybody, I don't know the details of the group that you're talking about. I mean, I don't think there's any Maoist organisation in Britain that's got more than about 20 members. So I've absolutely no idea who they were or what they said. If they were happy to work under those principles, the kind of founding principles of Stop the War, they would be welcome. I know that the convener of the Newcastle Stop the War is from a Maoist organisation, I think. So, but anyway, all I'm saying is, if you're happy to work under those principles, you're welcome in Stop the War. And that's the way we work. If you're not, then fine. But Stop the War is probably not the place for you.
All right. So it is not any policy of the Stop the War coalition to, on a very simple basis, exclude anyone as a
I mean, with China, I mean, there are people in Stop the War who think that the Chinese are doing an absolutely marvellous job and eradicating poverty, and that's a marvellous thing, and it's a planned economy. And there are people who think that it's an authoritarian dictatorship, and what they're agreed on is that there shouldn't be a Cold War between the West, never mind a hot war between the West and China. So you can come. That's the kind of practical version of the principle I was describing in the introduction. As long as you're agreed on Britain not militarily intervening, that's what we're for. You can have whatever analysis you like of the broader society, and you're welcome to hold it. You're welcome to articulate it, but it won't be the basis on which we unite, because we wouldn't unite. I mean, I don't agree with those people who think that China's a model for socialism, and they don't agree with me. So if we were to have to come to a position on that, one or other of us would leave. So we agree on what it's possible to agree with. Is none of us wants a war with China.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
My second question is, nowadays it's a lot of tensions, as we know, between East and West, particularly United States and Russia, you know, and it's increased lately. And my view is that we have not any particular view on NATO membership in the initiative, but mine is that NATO is a problem. That after the end of the Soviet Union and the so-called end of the Cold War, we are now into a new one, but now it can also be the danger of a hot war. And the Warsaw Pact nations, they ended their alliance, but NATO still are with us. And I think it's a very sensitive but also a dangerous situation. We have a very powerful alliance, and it's not any on the other side anymore. And it should have, of course, been that NATO was finished in the same time, more or less, as the other was. But we haven't that situation. So in this situation in Europe, in this case, I'm not talking about NATO outer area, it's another problem of itself. But how the coalition are working or could work on this issue. How can we do this more on the agenda in Europe? Because we have bases, we have secret places for nuclear weapons in north of Italy, for example, and also in Germany. But the public, they don't know about this. It hasn't been any issue, not so whatsoever, in Norwegian mass media, for example. And I think that's a big problem. How do you work with this, if you are focused on this as well?
Yeah, well, Stop the War has a different approach to the one that you guys have taken. We have taken a no to NATO position. That is the position of the Stop the War coalition. We're part of. I'm sure you're aware. There's a pan-European no to NATO network. We're part of that. We attend those conferences and those mobilizations. When the NATO conferences are in Britain, we have Stop the War mobilizations against them. It would be, I think, quite difficult in Britain because of the special relationship, because it's so central to how Britain goes to war. It would be very difficult to ignore that question and not to take a position on it. Which isn't to say that you might find that the coalition of forces is different where you are, that no to NATO's extraterritorial reach is as far as you can get and maintain the unity. I don't know. That's something which, like I say, the more precise the tactical issue we're discussing, the more exact the slogans, the less use I'm going to be to you, because tactics and precise slogans are a very localized affair. And the exact balance of forces within your coalition, only you know that. I've no idea what that is. So that has to be a decision that you take. All I can tell you is that I don't think we started out with that, but because we've been together for quite a long time, and because you can sort out some of these more complex issues, we arrived at that position quite early. And we really haven't had a difficulty maintaining the unity of the organisation with that as part of what we do. Now, it's not, we don't do that 365 days a year. It's not certainly, I think there's something like 25 or 30% of the population in this country is opposed to NATO. Now, that's not nothing, but it's not a majority either. So there's a basis for it. We're unlikely to sort of be put in a kind of absolutely tiny minority on that issue, and some of the demonstrations that we've had against NATO conferences have been reasonably substantial. So that's how we've that's how we have dealt with that issue. I certainly don't think any anti-war movement can ignore NATO and shouldn't discuss it. It's obviously the operational arm of Western imperialism. It's the flag under which the Afghan war was fought. That was a NATO operation. Iraq wasn't a NATO operation, but Afghanistan was. Libya was. So it's not an issue that can be ignored for long, I think.
Yeah. Okay. In Norway, we have little demonstration against the big exercises we have had recently, the last few years, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's also one thing in my mind is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But we have, as you know, it's not easy always to get out with the message and to understand what it's about.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
Okay, and good luck.
And to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Well, I can see that we have been talking for nearly an hour, so I just wanted to maybe not ask any more questions, but maybe sum up and talk a little bit about the situation and the future. I thought it was quite inspiring to listen to how inclusive your organization is. Personally, I can find it challenging. So I will really take that with me. And then to sum up your toolbox to us, you said that we should act and not discuss so much. Yeah. And we should simplify our communication and find depth in the population. And that is, of course, another workshop, how to do that. But one of the things you have done is this inclusion, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, I have a small question here, actually, because it's something that I'm curious about, because one of the 4 topics that we have discussed that we will work with the next 2 years is to demand a peace ministry, because we give out, you know, the so-called Peace Prize, and we have an active role in trying to conduct peace elsewhere. So I think Norway should have a peace ministry. And I told one of the art, I will show the artwork of her afterwards. I will give you a guided tour with a laptop. I told Sonja Krohn this, and she laughed. She was a bit tipsy, but I think she would laugh if she was sober as well. And she said that was the most stupidest idea she ever heard, because that would be just like another charade. And so, but what do you think? Do you still trust politicians?
Not in general, no. Some, but they're a minority. Jeremy Corbyn, I trusted. He came from the movement. I'd worked with him for years. I trusted Jeremy Corbyn. And there are a few MPs in Parliament like that, but they're a minority.
Yeah. So you think it's a bad idea to even spend energy to?
Not necessarily, no. And again, I just the honest answer is the honest answer is 2 things. Firstly, I'm completely sober, and second thing, I don't know, because I don't know whether it fits the kind of cultural political environment that you're in. I can see how under some circumstances it might well be something which catches people's imagination, and I understand also the whole question of kind of peace as an issue expressed in that way is probably a larger part of Scandinavian culture than it is in Britain, for instance. So I can see how if I thought about Britain, I'd say don't do it, because I don't necessarily think it would fly. But I'm not sure that that's true for you. I can see how it might well be, and I don't want to be kind of deaf to a different political environment. So it certainly sounds plausible, and there's no harm in experimenting, as long as you review whether or not it's working and stop doing it if it isn't. You know, there's a big culture on the left of committing yourself to a course of action, and then if it doesn't work, thinking, well, let's just keep on doing it, try harder, bang your head harder against the wall. And probably all round, it's safer and pleasanter to stop banging your head if it doesn't work.
This is another advice for us, I think.
Yeah. So, we've done plenty of things in Stop the War that don't work, but we try to stop doing them real quick. And then when we do get things that work, we try to sort of maximize the push on those, really. So that's, you know, nobody knows absolutely. I mean, you can often spot a bad idea in advance. You can often spot a good idea in advance. Quite a lot of the time, you can't tell till you do it, and so you have to be willing to review the experience and either push ahead or stop, depending on what that experience is. So that's, you know, that's how we try to do it. I'm not saying we always succeed, but that's how we try to approach those issues, really. I mean, you know, and there's very practical ways of doing that. If you decide that a peace ministry is a good idea, and you can get 30 really well-known public figures to sign a letter to the paper saying, yeah, this is a great idea, well, that's a good start at any rate. If you start hawking the letter around and you find only 2 of your most, you know, closest collaborators will sign it, well, maybe we'll just keep that for another day. You know, that's how I do these things. In the old days, when Tony Benn died a few years back, he was an extremely well-known pillar of the kind of Labour movement. And usually, what I'd do is, if I had an idea, I'd ring him up, see if he was willing to do it. If he was willing to do it, I probably thought it was a good idea. If he wasn't willing to do it, I thought, okay, we won't do that then. We aren't going to have that many friends with that one.
Some new numbers into my phone now. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's very definite ways of telling, I think.
Yeah. You see the eyes just roll back.
Yeah. It's actually.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a quick question. Yeah. Remember to talk slow.
Yes. Okay. But there are like some really exciting like youth, you know, like Tony Benn type, you know, like Richard Burton, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's anti-war. Like,
yeah.
We follow him a lot. So now, do you talk to him like if some like project is good, and is he like a replacement for Tony Benn? Or?
Yeah, I mean, nobody can quite replace Tony Benn. I mean, Tony Benn had a kind of unique presence in politics, really. But Richard Bergen is a good guy. I mean, he hosted a parliamentary briefing, which he organised for the Julian Assange campaign earlier this week. He got a dozen MPs along to that. That was really good work. John McDonnell, of course, who worked for a long time with Tony Benn, you know, he's somebody who, you know, if John McDonnell's up for it, then you're probably in a good place. Yeah, Diane Abbott again has a very good record. So there are a number of people who are like that, and also people who lead the trade union movement. If you go to them and you get a good response, then you think, okay, you know, that's how I piece it together. You know, if we've got some of the Labour left MPs on board, if we've got some of the trade union leaders on board, if you've got some of our allies in CND and the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament on board, then you're beginning to think, okay, this is beginning to look like a sort of serious thing. If these guys signed a letter to the Guardian and we sent it in, A, it'd get printed, B, it'd look pretty good. It would be a signal to the kind of whole of the Labour movement and to a wider section of society that this was a cause that you could get involved. In. That's what Tony Benn. If you had Tony Benn's name on something, you could guarantee that probably, you know, 300,000 people in the society would think, yeah, okay, that's worth listening to. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily do anything straight off. You have to be organised, but they'd say, okay, Ben says it's all right, it's probably all right. You know, that's what you're looking for, really.
That's what you're looking for.
For our generation, it's like more Richard Burton, like more related.
Yeah. But you know, at any given time, you know, different people emerge as having that kind of authority, and in different communities, of course. I mean, when we mobilised the Muslim community, frankly, well, Tony Benn did have a reach in there, but frankly, if you've got the Muslim Community of Britain organisation on board, or even in the locality, if you've got the local imam from the mosque on board, that's what did it for them. You know, it was less Tony Benn, more the imam. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's kind of our wish for this festival, was also to test out things. How does it work? How will people react, will become new members, and also to collaborate, and do things together. And this 10 days, we had the time to spend a lot of time together, and I think that's very important.
Yeah. Well, over time,
also,
you find out who you can trust and whose opinion you value and how you work together. And also you get a sense of what people's strengths and weaknesses are. And any collective leadership is a way of minimizing people's weaknesses and maximizing their strengths, because we all have strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that's true. And just getting experience. And I just wanted to mention one quite nice thing that we have built up here that you can think about and pass on, is that we have kind of formatted like an open source festival now, where we have kind of the framework, and it's open source in that way that you're welcome to bring it to any location and get the local community to bring content into it. So, because that's important.
Yeah.
So we got 4 cities in Bergen that wants to, or not cities in Bergen, cities in Norway that wanted to look into it, and also from abroad. So I think this is a nice thing. And define depth in the population. We also did today by getting the local radio program.
Good. Yeah. Brilliant.
So that's it. But the conclusion, I think, for this workshop is collaboration and inclusion and no imperialistic worldviews. Right. So that will sign out. And do you want to have like a little guide tour of the exhibition?
Why not? Why not?
Maybe the curator will do it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. Okay. I will just take in the personal space. Thank you. Okay.
Streaming.
You can stream it.
We can stream it. Okay. Hello.
Hi. How you doing?
Thank you for a very nice.
I'm literally.
As you are sitting inside your library, we are in this art exhibition here.
Brilliant.
So we have, is it 26 artists who each gave us works that deals with War and Peace somehow. So here we have a section from the Rojava in Syria, a documentation of a women's village. We have here a banner, which a quite famous painter did as a kind of, and she used it in the demonstrations when Norway was in Iraq as well. So
excellent.
So here is a video work from Turkey, in one of these Kurdish cities that were bombed by Erdogan, and where they walk into a house and actually find a copy of Guernica in the ruins of the house. So it's a nice. Then we have a wall over here of works related to the Iraq War and the American coalition of the willing, where Denmark, where it's my country, took part. So there's this idea of this. The title, the coalition of the willing, actually has a kind of double meaning, in the sense that it was meant as who are willing to support the US, but it's also what nations were willing to go all the way for US, in a sense, into torture and whatever. Then we have some paintings from, this one is, he's actually a quite well-known, now deceased painter, but he made these paintings about when NATO was established, so just different qualities from that. Then there's this the Peace Horse.
Wow.
With some very young artists who took part. So this is also a way of trying to engage younger people. And then here a kind of memorial for many of the refugees who was crossing over the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So for each person, there's a stone and a date of when they died. So we have a lot of different artworks. So this is also a way for us of testing out how how can we use art as a way of making reflections upon these issues.
Yeah, yeah, very good, very good.
Gitte,
Thank you very much.
But thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Everybody's taking notes, and I hope we can follow up somehow with a workshop part 2, or if we come to London, we could meet up, or a festival in the future. I don't know. We are now our next artistic project will try to make like a Bertolt Brecht inspired play.
Okay, good.
So let's see.
Yeah.
With some demonstrations in between.
Yes, marvelous.
Okay. Keep on working.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
You. Take care.
Det streamer på YouTube.
Still.
You want to say something? YouTube.
Det streamer på YouTube.
Yeah. I think now it stops. Yeah.